I don't know about you guys, but I would much rather take on a horrific supernatural beastie than face the empty space where it should be. I'm Tilly from What Culture Horror, and these are 10 horror movies where you don't see the monster. Number 10. Hereditary. Ari Aster's sublime directorial debut Hereditary revolves around a bereaved family who are terrorised in their home by an increasingly malevolent supernatural presence. It's revealed at the end of the film that the Graham family has actually been targeted by a cult, of which protagonist Annie's deceased mother was a highly ranking member. The various tragedies befalling Annie and co are part of a ploy by the Coven to find a suitable male host for Paimon, the demon they worship. At the film's terrifying conclusion, the host turns out to be Annie's doomed son Peter, who is incapacitated and unable to fend off Paimon as he takes possession of his weakened body and mind. Yet Aster smartly never once shows us Paimon in any sort of tangible form, only as drawings in a book, as he possesses the various members of the family, and perhaps as the mysterious blue light occasionally projected in their presence. The fact that Paimon is basically hiding in plain sight for so much of the movie only makes him that much creepier. Give me the spooky red demon thing from Insidious over this nightmare any day, thank you very much. Number 9. The Mothman Prophecies. Despite Mothman now being a darling of cryptozoology culture, director Mark Pellington knows that a CGI beast can rarely compete with the audience's own imagination. The Mothman Prophecies is a textbook example of less is more filmmaking, though it was marketed as a more conventional mainstream horror film. And so, while audiences and critics alike were left somewhat dismayed by the lack of an actual Mothman in the movie, Pellington's preference for character-driven chills makes the film infinitely more memorable as a result. Rather than relying on in-your-face effects, we never get more than a fleeting, ambiguous flash of the Mothman, the creature's terror conveyed instead by spoken accounts and extremely creepy drawings. Though this approach understandably won't be for all tastes, Pellington did craft one of the more atmospheric and evocative big-budget horrors of the 2000s here, which is really more of an eerie meditation on grief and loss than a card-carrying monster movie. The Mothman Prophecies is long overdue a re-evaluation, at least from those who can accept the absence of the bug bloke antagonist. Number 8. Fallen. The Denzel Washington starring 1998 horror film Fallen revolves around a fallen angel, Azazel, who uses human beings as hosts, much like the aforementioned Hereditary. In this case, however, Azazel is able to jump between hosts via physical contact and also possesses anything within a breath's distance in the event his current host dies. And so, though Azazel is present in numerous human forms throughout the film, and at the end even possesses a cat, we never know what his pure form looks like. Though invisible demons have been all the rage in cinema since Paranormal Activity made them cool again, Fallen was ahead of the curve by an entire decade, never forcing audiences to suffer through a goofy demonic get-up. Instead, director Gregory Hoblit let the possessed cast members, including eventually Denzel himself, do the heavy lifting and capture the essence of Azazel's murderous, misanthropic persona. Number 7. The Cabin in the Woods. The Cabin in the Woods is a really interesting example. You're probably wondering what the sci-fi horror film is doing on this list, given that it holds basically nothing back in unleashing a fleet of monsters upon its characters, particularly in its brilliantly deranged third act. Except, the real monsters are the ones we don't see. Or, to be exact, we don't see more than a giant hand of. The film's finale reveals that the suspiciously familiar, trope-filled horror scenario the characters have found themselves in is part of a ritual intended to appease the Ancient Ones, a group of evil deities living beneath the earth. The Ancient Ones can only be satisfied by making specific blood sacrifices around the globe, though upon learning of this, the two remaining survivors refuse to play, instead sparking up a joint as they await the impending apocalypse. The final shot of the movie shows nothing more than an Ancient One's hand bursting out of the earth and destroying the facility, while the exact physiology of the creatures is left brilliantly, infuriatingly up in the air. Number 6. Cat People. The only thing more frightening than a furry is a furry you cannot see. The legendary 1942 horror classic Cat People revolves around Irina, a young woman who believes herself to be descended from an ancient tribe of people who will transform into panthers upon becoming sexually aroused. As absurd as its premise might seem, Tournier's film is a masterful horror for one major reason. It balances its heightened setup with enormous restraint. Tournier makes the bold decision to never show the cat people to the audience, eschewing potentially silly monster makeup in favour of eerie shadow tricks and sound effects, trails of foot and paw prints, and the reactions of his characters. While on one hand the mere $135,000 budget may have explained the lack of on-screen monsters, it was certainly a fortuitous result, all things considered, building palpable mood and suspense through what we don't see. Paul Schrader's 1982 remake, meanwhile, opts for a decidedly gorier and more sexually explicit affair where the titular creatures are shown, and while hardly a sacrilegious remake, it doesn't get under the skin nearly as effortlessly as the original. Number 5. Rosemary's Baby. Roman Polanski's psychological horror classic follows Rosemary, played incredibly by Mia Farrow, as she quite literally deals with the pregnancy from hell, given that she's raped by Satan halfway through the film and then gives birth to his spawn at the climax. Now, it's fair to say we do briefly catch a few glimpses of Satan's piercing eyes in the film, but Polanski makes the curious decision to never once show us arguably the more dangerous long-term threat, the satanic son, Adrian. I wonder if there's a little demonic nursery where Adrian Damien Thorne could hang out. Rosemary nevertheless recoils at Adrian's eyes, which are said to be like his father's, while another member of the Satanic Coven implies that Adrian's hands and feet are mutated in some form, most likely resembling clubs or hooves. That Polanski never forces a janky prosthetic baby upon viewers is one of his many triumphs here, letting audiences think for themselves what the spawn of the devil would actually look like. Number 4. Duel. It's certainly possible to take Steven Spielberg's iconic directorial debut at face value, that it's simply a tale of a man being relentlessly pursued by the anonymous driver of a rusted-out tanker truck. Yet Spielberg makes such great pains to conceal the identity of the trucker's actor, Kerry Lofton, by only showing his arms and boots, that it's easy to accept there's something altogether more heightened going on here. This is bolstered by the fact that when protagonist David Mann manages to trick the trucker into driving off a cliff at the film's end, a bestial roar is heard which couldn't have been produced by either the driver or the truck. For literally 50 years, fans have speculated that the driver or the truck itself harbours some demonic properties. This is only accentuated by Spielberg's ruthless minimalism, never allowing us to get a clear fix on the driver, an approach that also paid out dividends in 1975's Jaws, where the malfunctioning shark props forced the director to focus his suspense on the power of the unseen. Number 3. The Haunting. Robert Wise's 1963 masterpiece The Haunting is a sublime exercise in chilling restraint and, much like Cat People, favours a minimalistic presentation over silly jump scares and goofy effects. And so the possibility of a supernatural presence at Hill House is defined by the subtle creak of floorboards and slamming doors, allowing the audience to paint a terrifying picture of unseen malevolence in their own minds. By never showing the entity, whatever it is, Wise is able to keep the reality, or not, of the situation crucially ambiguous, that it could all be imagined by our mentally fractured protagonist, Eleanor. Sadly, Jan de Bont's 1999 remake opted to eschew Wise's subtle approach, festooning the screen with aged-like-milk CGI ghouls, surely contributing to it receiving 5 Razzie nominations, including Worst Picture and Worst Director. At least we've got the Netflix adaptation to lessen the blow, even though that version certainly gives you some terrifying and heartbreaking stuff, #Nell deserved better. Number 2. The Evil Dead. The fact that Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead wasn't a complete laughingstock is nothing short of a miracle given the absolutely ramshackle nature of the movie's production. That it's a genuinely unsettling and intense horror despite its budgetary constraints is a testament to Raimi's go-for-broke filmmaking above all else, and the presence of Bruce Campbell, of course. Perhaps Raimi's single smartest decision was to keep the malevolent spirits off-screen in their purest form, instead using possessed humans to act as their conduits. Ingeniously, the demonic entity's movements are occasionally captured from a first-person perspective, meaning we as the audience never see what it looks like, only what it's seeing. Though the sequels let loose with more tangible demonic mayhem, the lo-fi original necessitated a much more subtle approach and is in turn the scariest of the trilogy. Number 1. The Borderlands. Cult classic horror The Borderlands is an especially diverting entry into the found footage subgenre. Following 2 men sent by the Vatican to investigate reports of paranormal activity in a recently reopened 13th century Devon church. Per its low budget, the film has a vested interest in subtlety and showing the viewer as little as possible, ensuring audiences remain as skeptical as our protagonists for much of the runtime. But even when the situation becomes increasingly dire amid whispers of pagan ritual sacrifices, director Elliot Goldner doesn't show much that can't be explained rationally, and never once gives audiences a clear glimpse of the presence terrorising Brother Deacon and Grey. The film's unforgettable final sequence shows Deacon and Grey descending into a passage, which begins to constrict and emit a digestive enzyme, seeming to imply the two have somehow wound up inside the literal belly of a beast, leaving them to be consumed. But we never see anything beyond the eerily undulating walls, like a belly dancer from hell of the apparent beast's stomach moving, its exact nature left entirely ambiguous as the film reaches its grim end. And that's our list. What other horror movies left monsters to our imaginations? Let us know down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe and swing on by our channel again if you want to catch more creepy content. I've been Tilly and this has been What Culture. Thank you so much for watching, make sure you're looking after yourselves and I'll see you all soon.